We've changed our model code to retrieve product information from the database instead of from a PHP array. We had separated out model code cleanly for our listing pages, so we didn't have to make any changes to the controller or view code for those. We're now ready to tackle the shirt detail pages. Unfortunately, we didn't separate concerns quite as cleanly on those. Most of the changes we'll need to make will be in the model code, but we will also need to do a little refactoring to clean up the controller code. In your text editor, open up shirt.php. In our controller code here at the top, the first thing we do is call the getProductsAll function. This currently queries the database to get the full list of products and loads them into an array called products. With a database, it's pretty inefficient to get the full list of products when all we're after is one shirt, so let's refactor this page to avoid that. After this, we check the web address for an ID. That's how we determine which shirt we want to display. If it is set, then we load it into this product ID variable here. This next block of code determines if the product ID corresponds to a real shirt or not. It does this by looking in the full products array for an element with the product ID as its key. If the ID corresponds to a valid shirt, then it loads that shirt into a variable called product. I think this block of code probably fits best in the model. It's dealing with factual questions about the data, like, is there a shirt with a SKU of 108? I could easily see this code being used on other pages across the site if we were to add more functionality later. Imagine adding a featured product section on the home page that listed a handful of products, or a shopping cart page that listed the products in a visitor's cart. All of those pages would need to contain code like this, code that starts with a SKU and ends with a variable containing the product information corresponding to that SKU. Let's start refactoring here at the top. We don't need this call to getProductsAll. We do still need this code to determine what shirt we should be looking for. The end result we want is a variable named product that contains a single product just like we have now, so we want our call to the model to look something like this. I would typically write the model function first and then work my way back to the controller code that calls it, but I think it's a bit easier to understand what's going on if we start with the controller code in this case. But that means we can't really preview this code yet until we write that function in the model. Right now, this code would produce a PHP error because we're calling a function that doesn't exist. Bear with me, we'll create that function shortly. This next block of code checks to see if the product variable exists. Previously, if it didn't exist, we knew we had an invalid shirt ID and we would redirect to the shirt's listing page. The way we had all this code written before, that variable would only exist if the product ID corresponded to a real shirt. That's not quite the case anymore. This product variable will now get created when we ask the model if the shirt ID is valid, even if the answer is no. Instead of using the isSet function, let's think about how we could check this. If the shirt ID does correspond to a real shirt, the getProductSingle function should return an array of details for that shirt. But what if the shirt ID doesn't correspond to a real shirt? What should the return value be then? Since we're writing the code for the getProductSingle function, we can make that return variable whatever we want. Why don't we set that to false? That will make our function work a bit like the string position function we looked at earlier. The return value will be an array with elements if a shirt with the SKU is found, and a Boolean false otherwise. In that case, we cannot use the isSet function anymore to check if the product variable exists. We now need to check whether or not it's empty. The empty function will still check to see if the variable exists, and it will redirect if not. But using empty adds an extra check to see if it contains an empty value like a Boolean false. In either case, if the product variable doesn't exist, or if it does exist but has a Boolean false value, it will be considered empty, and the code inside this conditional will execute, redirecting to the shirt's listing page. Let's be sure to update our comment above this block of code to reflect this change. This would have been a much cleaner separation. Whether we have our data in an array or a database, our controller code should just take the SKU from the web address and ask the model for the shirt with that SKU. The logic to determine if a SKU represents a valid shirt or not should always have been in the model. Let's next head back over to our products include file and code this new function.